Hello and welcome to the New World Review, your source for everything anime and manga, quite specifically Jujutsu Kaisen, and even more specifically, we are here to rank every domain featured thus far in the series. Why, you ask? Well, I ask you in return. Why not? But it's a surprisingly difficult thing to do actually, because the entire principle behind domains is that they act as these instant win conditions in the vast majority of curse-related combat. So it's like going into a deck of cards and trying to rank all of the aces without any knowledge of suit order. But domains are great. Jujutsu Kaisen, also great. And you, the viewer viewing this viewable media, are even better than great. So we're going to do it regardless. And it's all going to commence with a quick round of, oh no, I've been caught in a domain. A very simple minigame, the rules of which are as follows. You have been unfortunate enough to have been isekai'd into the Jujutsu Kaisen world. And upon arriving, you encounter these three characters. One of them is going to trap you in their domain, and it is going to be your job to guess which it will be. Should you guess incorrectly, then your punishment will be to subscribe to the New World Review, thus resulting in consistent injections of Jujutsu sorcery administered straight into your YouTube feed. And if you do guess correctly, then you will be spared from your brutal domainy fate. But which domain will it be? A, B, or C? Make your choice now and we shall reveal the answer in 3, 2, 1. And bam, it is Sukuna's Malevolent Shrine. That's unfortunate. Unfortunate for you. So if you guessed incorrectly, then you know the thing to do, and please do say hi in the comments below if you are a new member of the channel. Welcome. In the meantime, at the time of this recording, we have 8 domains to rank. Sort of. It's more like 7.5 to be honest with you, because despite how fast and furiously these bad boys were thrown at us in the early days of the series, domains are actually pretty incredibly rare. Oh, and you know what? This might also be a great time to mention that this video will include manga spoilers, because we've got some fun stuff to talk about there for anime only watchers. Apologies for that, but it's pretty difficult to do a video like this without going into how shall we say, certain details. But with that said, our easy answer to the question of which domain ranks in dead last is of course the simple domain. It's more on this list due to a technicality because it's actually designed as a domain countermeasure, but it does still result in a very similar effect by creating a unique area of control and even sometimes granting its users special abilities within said area. And one good example of this would be Miwa, whose simple domain allowed her to automatically strike anyone who entered it. Even then though, sadly, it's not a guaranteed hit because particularly fast opponents can, will, and have avoided it. Which sure is far from the instant win condition that most real domains present, but it's actually quite effective when utilized well. However, another issue with simple domains is that they can also come equipped with some rather detrimental activation requirements. To go back to the case of Miwa once again, she is not allowed to move her feet after activation or the simple domain will cease to exist. And in the end, simple domains, well, they're more of a handy utility that seemingly anyone can learn. However, that's also no fun because a true domain is very much an expression of a curse user's inner workings, and for an example of that, we now move to number 7, the Chimera Shadow Garden. A domain wielded by one Megumi Fushiguro, which is mercifully easy to rank as it was identified as an incomplete domain expansion and has yet to be fully refined by the increasingly overpowered existence that is Fushiguro. And I suppose the most interesting thing about the domain as it stands would be that its ability provides far more mental and strategic advantage than it does this overwhelming physical power-based victory. The domain may get to that stage in the future, but right now its selling point is that it allows Fushiguro to make full use of his imagination via the wonderful and copious substance of shadow goop. In theory, it may allow Fushiguro to do just about anything, and when I say anything, I mean manipulating the Shadow Garden to assume seemingly any form, including creating duplicates of Fushiguro himself. These constructs themselves don't pose too much of a threat to a skilled opponent, but it's more about how they're used very tactically in conjunction with Fushiguro's standard sorcery. Although I have to say my favorite thing about Chimera Shadow Garden is that it unleashes a side of Fushiguro that we almost never get to see. A man unbound by all of the constraints of the world around him. Someone who is free to be truly selfish, and it really does seem to be a very cathartic experience for him. Which is nice, it's very nice and all, but it's still 7th place. Moving on to the coveted 6th position, we have an unnamed domain of the smallpox deity, which I will say right here and now is the domain that probably interests me the most because of its series of conditions and also its general existence. It's fun, it's cool, and it's weird. The smallpox deity itself being a special grade curse spirit under the control of not Ghetto, which means that it implemented its domain with an almost AI style of operation. You know, like if you're in the boss battle of a game and you identify a clear pattern that the boss never deviates from no matter what. That is the smallpox deity. But it is still quite terrifying because the idea is that this domain traps its target within a coffin, which is then smushed by a big old death rock, and then after a 3-second countdown, the target is infected with a fatal disease. A disease that will render them rather dead. But luckily, they're already in a coffin underground, so the funeral arrangements have have already been taken care of. But yes, this domain has quite a few steps to go through, but I really do like all of those fun technicalities. The true reason why it ranks so lowly, however, is because of the AI function I mentioned earlier. The smallpox deity has a design flaw whereby it automatically targets the strongest source of cursed energy, which does make it very susceptible to tactical manipulation, and in Jujutsu Kaisen it tends to be a big problem if a combatant cannot think efficiently, much less when they cannot think at all. So with that in mind, this is where we land. But landing slightly better than that is number 5, Horizon of the Captivating Skandha. And this I will say is by far the most pleasant of all of the domains we'll be exploring, potentially ever, because when not being used to brutally dismember targets with its fish-based Shikigami, it actually serves as quite a delightful holiday spot. The domain itself is wielded by Dagon, who is unfortunately the least explored of all of the cursed nature dudes, but even then this domain does tell us quite a bit about him, being a creature who desires the peace and beauty of nature, but also not being afraid to weaponize that nature to destroy those who would seek to destroy it. And as a quick side note, we never saw Hanami's domain expansion, but I imagine that it would have been very similar to this. Like a delightful, stunning flower field that can morph into an army of apocalyptic plant things. But back to Dagon, this domain is slightly disappointing in that it's very straightforward in its approach. People get trapped on the beach or in the water, and then they're assaulted by a myriad of Shikigami. And I feel like that's a bit underwhelming because it almost seems like a version of the Chimera Shadow Garden that lacks the nuance and versatility of Fushigura's use. However, in place of that nuance is a complete domain and raw power. I guess that's the thing, Dagon's Death Swarm is more than enough to eventually overwhelm almost any opponent. Dagon just got quite unlucky with the particular group he encountered, in the same way that Jogo tends to get quite unlucky with Gojo. And speaking of, we have number 4, Coffin of the Iron Mountain. And this would be the second domain that we are knowingly exposed to in the series. That's right, Jogo exposed himself to us, nasty little spirit thing. But unlike his peace-loving nature counterparts, Coffin of the Iron Mountain probably represents the peak fury of the natural world, essentially locking its targets within an active volcano, which means that they're going to be attacked with all sorts of things like fire, magma, fissures, and this domain also comes with an added bonus of raw heat. The environmental conditions alone would kill most victims of this domain without ever needing to launch any attacks whatsoever. Jogo's domain is simply that brutal. It really is one of the most terrifying yet underrated abilities within the series, because Jogo's juxtaposition has been highly unfavorable. His two main conflicts in Jujutsu Kaisen just so happen to be against Gojo and Sukuna, which provides a very poor and sad impression of Jogo's power. He is insanely strong, and within this domain, unless you are one of the aforementioned two characters, it is almost certainly going to obliterate you. With that said, I still don't think it's quite as good as number 3, Self-Embodiment of Perfection. So next up we have Mahito's creepy handsy touchy-feely domain. And the main reason why I would have placed this above Coffin of the Iron Mountain is because with Mahito's domain there is no need to perform an attack at all. Anybody caught within Self-Embodiment of Perfection will have their soul subject to Mahito's idol transfiguration without the need for him to physically touch them. Souls are just automatically and very non-consensually touched by this domain, which is amazing unless it's used in one specific situation where the soul of someone much more powerful than you is, felt up. And in the case of Sukuna, he really did not appreciate this soul harassment, resulting in Mahito's grand punishment. I really don't see that as too much of a drawback to the domain in general though. I mean, provided Sukuna is not within the domain, it's as good as done. And what I'll also say is that this to me is probably the most horrifying domain expansion. From a perspective of pure terror, I hate this so much. The sprawling hands in the darkness is pure nightmare fuel, and the idea that you are now under the complete control of the grotesque desires of Mahito is far more unpleasant than the idea of being caught in a really violent domain like Jogo's, or honestly anyone else's domain, even the ones we still have yet to explore, which leads us quite nicely into number 2, which is Malevolent Shrine, the domain of Mr. Sukuna himself. This is probably the most unique technique that we have on today's ranking, and that comes down to pure experience. Sukuna, aka the King of the Curses, has an understanding of wielding cursed energy far more in depth than most. So what we have is a domain that does not utilize the standard advantage of a domain, which would be the creation of a barrier to trap its target. Instead, if one is caught within Malevolent Shrine, they are actually 100% capable of moving outside of it should they find the escape route. The problem being that in exchange for this escape condition, Sukuna is capable of increasing the radius of the guaranteed domain hit ability, like significantly increase, to an area that covers a maximum radius of 200 meters if desired. From there, Sukuna can use Dismantle and Cleave as necessary to attack anyone or anything within this area until glorious death and or destruction has been achieved. Ideally both. And like all true domains, this does say quite a bit about Sukuna himself. He is so confident in his own abilities that he exists to make sport of cursed combat. To be entertained as the king he he is. So he allows his targets to have the hope of escape whilst choosing to hunt them in these very, very gory ways. Dismantle and cleave are not the most efficient of killing techniques, but to Sukuna, they are the most fun. So there is that. And of course, the scariest thing is that we haven't even seen Sukuna utilize his domain at full power, so things could get even more insane in the future. Perhaps even elevating Malevolent Shrine to the coveted status of first place. However, for now, our undisputed winner is pretty obviously going to be Unlimited Void, or Limitless Void, or even Immeasurable Void. You can call it whatever you want. Because after becoming trapped in this domain, you will have immediate access to a full thesaurus of every language, and in fact, every piece of information about everything ever. You'll be so overwhelmed with knowledge that you will become paralyzed by choice, not knowing what to fixate on. And I think I said this in one of my reviews of the series, but it's kind of like when you're out with a group of friends and you're trying to decide where to eat. It is absolutely frustratingly impossible because you're all frozen by the amount of choice, and until someone takes charge, you're all just gonna stand there and slowly starve to death, which is very much how Gojo's domain functions. The target afflicted by all of this knowledge will just stand there and slowly die, unable to function in any way, shape, or form. That or Gojo will take the opportunity to kill them swiftly if they are lucky, and that's a big if. So it really is difficult to go past Unlimited Void as an utterly dominant domain thing, particularly because Gojo can use it multiple times within a single day, something that no other true domain user has been capable of at this point. So as per usual, anything involving Satoru Gojo will end up with Satoru Gojo on top, as he will be awarded with the bestest of all of the domains in Jujutsu Kaisen. But now that you've seen the best, go and see something else on this channel. To be precise, like this video, it's going to be good fun, I promise, so I look forward to seeing you there.